Hello, everybody. So great to see so many of you coming along to our Hope session this afternoon. Karen.
Yeah, so I am Karen, by the way.
That's nice.
And this is David.
I'm David. Good to see you guys.
We're third-year students here at Warwick. Welcome to Hope. What is Hope all about?
Yeah, so this is an amazing week that we have put on as part of the Warwick Christian Union, and it's really just an opportunity for just everyone to come in and just hear a little bit about what we're about, what we believe in, a person of Jesus and who he is, and maybe just get to meet some new people, see some smiley faces. I see there's a lot of lovely people that have come along today.
Yeah, so we have stuff like this going on throughout the year, actually, as a Christian Union, and so hopefully this week is just a glimpse of what goes on during the rest of the year. Today we've got a talk coming up from Tom. He's going to come up in a second. And then after that, we'll have time for a Q&A and some lunch as well.
Yeah, it's going to be really good. So this talk that we're going to be heading into is titled Hope When It Hurts, Where is God in My Suffering? So it's going to be a really great talk, and I really encourage you guys to, just really focus in and engage with what's happening. We're going to have a couple discussion questions, I think, as things go along, just to help sort of maybe think over some of these, what can be quite difficult topics sometimes. As we head into the talk, I'd just like to mention a couple of housekeeping things. So in the event of a fire, very unlikely, I don't think I've ever seen a fire in this building, so we should be all good. But if we do hear the alarm, there is the door that you came in, just at the back there. That's our number one fire exit, and we also have ones at either side if anything like that happens. We'd also like to encourage you guys to maybe pop your phones into Do Not Disturb, just to help, keep things engaging and not distracting for everyone here.
Yes, but there should be time for discussion. And so if you do have any questions or you're just wondering about something, feel free to just turn around to the people next to you, have a chat. I'm sure there's a lot of CU people around that would love to tell you a bit more and help chat through things with you.
Yeah, absolutely. And obviously probably something that you've all heard coming along to this, we will have some food after the event, which will point you in the direction of that. Karen, would you like to tell us something about the talk?
Yes, so today's talk is about hope in suffering, which I think is very relevant, something we've probably all questioned at some point. I'm going to invite Tom up. He's going to be speaking to us today.
Thank you.
Do you want to tell us a bit about who you are, what you do, why you want to talk about this, maybe?
Well, I want to talk about this because you invited me very kindly, and I'm very grateful. But who wants to get up in the morning and go somewhere in the rain and talk about suffering? And well done to all of you for jumping in and being interested in the topic. I think the reason why I'm here is the reason why every single one of you is here, is because we know that within our lives we will each go through times where we feel alone, where we feel challenged, where we will go through pain and we will experience grief. That's the reality of life. There's no way to escape that. In our experience of life, that is what all of us have ahead of us. And I think this question is so troubling and so serious that part of what I'm doing is doing a doctorate in the problem of evil. And I'm looking at a particular connected problem called the problem of divine hiddenness. I'm doing that in the areas of theology and philosophy, but I'm also looking at how film and how story and narrative can be a way for us to step back from philosophical questions, intellectual questions, which I think we need to take seriously, but it can also be another way of coming at things. I often find that poetry and story and film and art and music are the things that actually partly help me when I go through pain and suffering. I'm sure you'll find the same thing. Sometimes when you go through a breakup, you don't want to listen to any love songs because they sort of bring it all back, and that just shows you the power that music and art can have to bring things into the open. So my name's Tom. I'm doing some studies in philosophy and theology. My day job is that I work as a speaker for a centre in Oxford called the Oxford Centre for Christian Apologetics. I've been there for nearly, not quite 20 years, but about 15 years. And I have had the joy and the excitement to travel all over the world and to speak on topics like this as a way of helping other people to make the same journey that I made When I arrived at university, I wasn't a Christian. I was a philosophy student, I was a computer science student simultaneously, and I started to think about Christian faith in a deeper way. I started to think about religious questions, partly because of the things that were generated by my studies. And that led to me coming to a religious belief, coming to a Christian belief, coming to a Christian conviction. But that came for me through the mind and through the heart at the same time. And I like sharing that journey with people. So I hope I'll be able to do a bit of that today.
That sounds great.
Okay,
We'll
should we
leave
get
you
into
to
it?
it.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, so there'll be moments during the next 20, 30 minutes or so where you might feel that some of what I'm going to say is a little bit dry, a little bit arid, a little bit cold. And there'll be moments as well where it might connect quite powerfully. My hope is that you'll walk away from these conversations today with some suggestions, with some ideas, with some of my sketchings in the sand, which might help you to deal with and navigate suffering as you go through it in your life. I've found some hope. I'd like to share that with you. It comes in different shapes. Some of it speaks more to the head, some of it speaks more to the heart, and some of it's just really practical, and I hope that some of it's useful to you. I wonder if you followed the news in the last couple of days. There was the conviction of a young man, Axel Ruda Cubana, who had targeted a group of children in a dance studio in Southport, Merseyside. This young man went round, he essentially went with the aim and has been convicted of killing 3 children. He injured 10 other people. These were kids who were dancing to Taylor Swift in a dance studio. Mr. Justice Goose said in the judgment that he had targeted the children for the horrific and extreme violence he was intent upon. He had wanted to murder as many of them as he physically could. He wanted to try and carry out a mass murder of innocent, happy young girls. It took 15 minutes for his evil rage to unfold. The attack has been difficult to comprehend for every single person who's heard about it. Yesterday also was the anniversary of, it was the Holocaust Memorial Day. It's the anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz-Birkenau, the largest Nazi death camp. The Holocaust was an extraordinary and horrific period during the Second World War, where 6 million Jews, along with millions of others, including Romani people, disabled people, political prisoners and others, were systematically murdered in gas chambers by the Nazi regime led by Adolf Hitler. It was an absolutely wicked thing. The problem of suffering, as I've said, is so serious for me that it's actually part of why I'm a Christian. Why would I say something like that? Well, I think that any sane, sensible, moral human being looks at the world and says something is broken, something is wrong, something is not right, something is unjust, something is just messed up in these situations, and with people perhaps. I need a solution. I think that's the response that any reasonable person might make. If there could be a solution to that, that would be the most beautiful, the most wonderful, the most amazing, the most transformative thing that had ever happened, if we could somehow address suffering. So I want to say to you that here are a couple of ideas as we go forwards. Specific answers might need specific questions, specific needs might need specific answers. I think we're quite used to this in most areas of life. When you go to the doctor and you're suffering with maybe a long-term chronic illness, you may need a variety of different interventions, a variety of different things. You might need support from family, you might need good nutrition, you might need actually to target maybe hopefully the cause of that illness. You might also need exercise, you might need rehabilitation, you might need all kinds of things. And we know that sometimes complicated problems need multifaceted answers. You don't clean your computer with water generally because it short circuits it. And some ways of addressing problems actually don't work with other ways, with other needs. And so I want to encourage you to look for specific needs to specific answers. Second thing is, please don't settle for any kind of reductionism. As soon as somebody says to you, look, evil's not a thing, it's just a word, it's just inferred into meaning, what we think of as evil because of philosophical systems and because of narratives. Don't take that seriously. When you look at something like the Holocaust, you look at those murders in Southport, when the pit of your gut and stomach and heart and mind cry out and say, that's wrong, and you dare to reach for the word evil, I want to encourage you, do it with confidence. There is a real thing called evil. It's a real thing. There is real brokenness. There is real good and evil in the world. Don't settle for perspectives that just reduce these words to just the feelings of human beings. There are real moral laws and principles and realities in our world. Take that seriously. Thirdly, be serious about the problem of suffering. As I said, I'm so serious, and I really am concerned with the problem of suffering, that's part of what motivated me to look into Christian faith, because Christian faith held out the possibility of a solution. You may not be persuaded by that right now. You might think that's the most unlikely thing in the universe. You may not even contemplate that. You're just here for maybe some free food or just to hang out and see friends. But I think that the problem of suffering is troubling, and I think that if there is just the slimmest possibility of there being an answer, I think we should all look into that. Okay, so to get you thinking a bit more about these things and chatting to the people around you, I've got a couple of questions for you to consider. Turn to the person sitting next to you and, in a very light-hearted and jovial way, try to discuss this question. Can the existence of suffering challenge or strengthen faith? In what ways? So can the existence of suffering challenge or strengthen, say, belief or faith in a good God, perhaps? In what ways? And how have your experiences with suffering influenced your beliefs about God? I'm going to give you 2 or 3 minutes to talk about that, so jump in. No small talk here at CU lunchtime on Tuesday. I'm going to give you some time to have another chat in a moment, but forgive me for breaking into your conversations. I really hope you can continue those chats through this lunchtime. And if you want a place to hang out, to just talk, I think there's a marquee that's heated that you can go and chill in, and you can continue conversations. And we'd love to invite you to have a place to go and talk about these things that matter. The next section that I've prepared to talk to you about is what I call the intellectual or the thinking problem of pain. And it's this idea that there is a thinking problem, an intellectual problem with believing that God is good and that suffering exists. John Mackey, famous philosopher, put it like this in what's called the logical problem of evil. If God is all good and God can do anything, then how can evil exist? Now, many philosophers now believe that this type of way of formulating the problem of evil, the problem of suffering, doesn't really work, because there can be reasons that we don't know of that may allow God to be morally good, and God can be all-powerful, but there still can be the existence of suffering. I'll move it closer to my mouth, and then you won't have to ride it so much. Sorry about that. So I think that we need to reflect, though, on how suffering and how the intellectual problem of suffering works a little bit. So let me try and say a few remarks about that, and then I'm going to move on to some more practical things that connect with our psychology and connect with our emotions and connect with our hearts a bit more. But I want to try to do the questions of the head, the intellect, a little bit of justice first. So what I'm about to say is going to feel not very helpful when you go through experiences of suffering. It's going to feel a bit dry. Please just stay with me and we'll get through it. So I want to say that a universe that allows the development of human beings and the development of what we might call moral character, which makes it possible for people to become precious, valuable, more precious and valuable than, say, rocks or minerals, is of greater value than a universe that doesn't permit such a thing to happen. The moral development, the development of the capacity to have a personality, to have a character which could choose the good, is only possible in a world of genuine freedoms. You have to have some genuine freedoms if you're to allow the development of such a world as I've just described. The development and the nurturing of moral goodness in people has to go alongside with the possibility of people choosing the opposite, choosing evil, choosing to exercise their freedom. And so God, in creating a world in which there's the possibility of people having characters and having independent wills where they can really choose, that has to go alongside with the possibility of suffering and evil in a world. To nurture moral perfection, some horrendous moral crimes have to be permitted by God to pass, even though God never actualizes, never causes them or requires them. Good people who might become so have to live in a world where doing evil is a genuine choice for them. Now, doesn't this mean that God is limited in power? Isn't that what somebody might say? Well, no, I don't think it does, because the impossible is not something that could be done or left undone. This room has somebody probably a team of people who are responsible for setting it up and cleaning it and looking after it, making sure there are fire extinguishers, etc. If that team hasn't cleaned it, then maybe the supervisor will say, hey, could you do this, please? But the supervisor cannot both say, please clean the room and don't clean the room at the same time. That's not a thing. The supervisor cannot ask the cleaning team to do something that's logically impossible. Sweeping the room, cleaning the room, and not cleaning the room is not something that can be left done and left undone. It's nothing at all. Now, the fact that the cleaning team can't do that doesn't mean they're limited in some way. It's just an impossible thing. And to say that God is limited because he can't nurture character, moral character, the ability to choose, while simultaneously preventing choice, is like regarding the team as limited because they can't do those two opposite, contradictory things. Producing people with character without giving them choice is impossible, because fundamentally the capacity to choose, the ability to choose, is part of character. It's built in. Now, a slightly more tricky problem of evil is called the gratuitous or the probabilistic problem of evil. And this is to do with the amount of suffering we see in the world. And I think it's important for us to bear in mind that when we are reacting to and reflecting on these types of reflections and these types of problems, is that the context is really important. For any probability calculation, if we say, okay, look, the amount of evil in the world makes it look like God's unlikely, or the type and the nature of evil in the world makes it look like God's unlikely. With any probability calculation, those of you who are into stats and maths will know that background factors, background information is probably quite important. Context matters with probabilities. Suppose I told you that Pete is a medical student. And now, you may know that medic students quite like drinking. And maybe we might say 95% of medics, it's known, drink beer sometimes, some more than sometimes. Now, with respect to that information, it makes it highly probable that Pete, the medical student, drinks beer. 95% of medical students drink beer. However, suppose we then find out that Pete belongs, bit of background sort of information, context information, we suddenly find out that Pete belongs to a very strict religious fraternity or college, and the whole of that college are deeply committed and go around marching, talking about teetotalism, and they're all non-drinkers. Suddenly, Pete, belonging to that college, has updated the probability and has changed things. And we wouldn't necessarily be so confident that Pete was not a drinker. In the same sort of way, the theist, the person who wants to maintain belief in God and a good God, is able, rationally and reasonably, to appeal to a wider picture of information, to be able to update the probability about God's existence. It's not right to just simply take the calculation on the amount of suffering in the world. You also have to look at the amount of goodness in the world. You have to look at God's demonstrations of his own intervening love. You have to look and take into account the fact that God did something through Jesus on the cross at Calvary, which was a profound answer and a sign of God's goodness, a demonstration and a revelation of God's goodness that might go alongside a probability calculation that we might do. Now, I told you, I did warn you this was going to feel quite dry, but we're going to move on a little bit further. You're welcome to come back on some of this. I also think that there's the problem of the broken world and natural suffering, what we might call natural evil, as opposed to just human moral evil. One answer here that the Christian might be able to turn to is to say, look, the world is broken and fallen, and the chronology of the world's brokenness and fallenness is that there's a chaotic kind of introduction. There's a brokenness that entered the world. So that when Adam and Eve, in the first story of humanity, the Garden of Eden, when they transgressed, when they acted against God, they broke the world. Other people would say, no, that we can say other things alongside that. We could also say that there was an angelic fall that occurred earlier that impacted the creation in all sorts of ways that we don't really know, we're not sure of. Because there was a serpent in the garden when Adam and Eve were there, wasn't there? Where did the serpent come from? What was going on there? There must have been something that happened earlier. Then there are other resources where people say, no, look, the nature of God's creative act is that you've got this sort of disorder, and then God speaks order into being. And so we've got stages of God ordering the chaotic world. Other people think, well, maybe that sort of raises other questions. We can push more back into those things as well, but there are a few thoughts there. I want now to turn to the final part in this thinking or intellectual problem and just describe very briefly that I think there is a dilemma that lies behind the question. I think that when we raise the question, God, why don't you do something about evil? Why don't you stop it? Why don't you stop me suffering? What's going on? This seems so unfair. This seems so unjust. How can you be good when I see that? I think that we do need to realize that we are invoking potentially a moral terminology here. We are invoking potentially moral categories. Now, it may be that we're just stepping inside of the Christian's worldview and we're trying to pull it apart from within. That's fine. But it could also be that we really mean it when we say that thing's wrong. And if so, where do we draw those moral categories from? Where do we draw that sense of right and wrong from? This is called the moral rejoinder. And it may lead to the fact that suffering may point us back towards God as the one who supplies the standard of goodness and justice by which we look at the world and we say there's something broken. This is quite an interesting little video clip, I hope it plays, where Simon Cowell is sent during filming for the 6th series of American Idol. They launched a campaign called Idol Gives Back. It was like a sort of relief project. And Simon Cowell is sent to Africa to try to draw in donations for this. And he says something in this clip, and I want you to try to notice what he says about what he sees. Normally, Simon Cowell, so confident, so sure of what he thinks. Let's listen to what he says. Oh, you missed that slide. Okay, sorry. There we go.
So tell us what we're going to see today.
It's different from whatever you're used to. Spider
Where are your parents?
They died.
They died. You see a 12-year-old boy who's the father of a family who's running the house. It's amazing how courageous, how brave, how strong that little boy is. It's just horrible, huh?
Oh, this is just intolerable.
It's not good condition.
This is
Because
terrible conditions.
There are 300 kids, and some of them waiting now, which will come to this facility each and every day for treatment of malaria, the #1 killer in all of Africa.
It's just unbelievable. It's just wrong.
This is quite literally hell on earth. I have never seen anything like this in my life.
Along the way, despite...
Sorry to cut that short. Please go and look it up. It's a bit eye-opening, as I'm sure it seemed to be for Carol. Notice something important here. That Carol says this was wrong, this wasn't right. Here's how C.S. Lewis put the dilemma that somebody like Simon Cowell, or maybe us, when we look at the world and we say something's broken, something's not right, God should do something about it. Here's how C.S. Lewis put this for himself. If a good God made the world, why has it gone wrong? For many years, I simply refused to listen to the Christian answers to this question. My argument against God was that the universe seems so cruel and unjust. But how had I got this idea of just and unjust? A man does not call a line crooked unless he has some idea of a straight line. What was I comparing this universe with when I called it unjust? If the whole show was bad and senseless from A to Z, so to speak, why did I, who was supposed to be part of the show, find myself in such violent reaction against it? A man feels wet when he falls into water because man is not a water animal. A fish could not feel wet. Of course, I could have given up my idea of justice by saying it was nothing but a private idea of my own. But if I did that, then my argument against God collapsed too, for the argument depended upon saying that the world was really unjust. Okay, little discussions for you now. What might a solution to suffering in the world look like? What's needed? What do you need when you go through suffering? I'm going to give you 2 or 3 minutes to talk about those questions. If you're able to, please encourage you to be vulnerable. Maybe you never see the person sitting next to you again in your life. Maybe you're stuck with them for the next 2 or 3 years. I don't know. Please share vulnerably if you're able to. Thank you. Forgive me for breaking into your conversations once again. I hope that those are useful questions for you. I find them slightly troubling and also challenging as well. How do I cope with suffering in my life? How do you cope with suffering in your life? How do you cope with pain today? The other side of this is not so much pushing God away, but how can I let God in? How can I find comfort when I go through suffering? And this is not the thinking problem of pain so much as it is the existential or emotional or personal problem of pain. When I go through suffering, one of the things I notice is after the immediate physical sensations in the body, the anxiety, the hopelessness sets in and the cynicism sets in, and I begin to feel quite often like I'm quite alone and nobody else gets what I'm going through and what I'm seeing. I remember about 4 years ago, my dad really very nearly died from a brainstem stroke, and he was in a coma for a couple of days afterwards. I remember just being with my mum in the resuscitation room after they rushed him in, and just looking at her eyes and feeling like she looked quite alone, and I wanted something to comfort her and somebody to help her and to take that away from her. She said to me, "It's too soon, he's too young. Just a few more years, please. That's all I want." And in this instance, there was hope. He did gradually recover, and he's doing much better now. But when we go through those times, and we each will, that's a certainty to some extent, I'm sorry to say. We will wonder how we can find comfort in those moments. Jesus Christ is utterly unique in this way, as well as other ways, but in this way. When Jesus is hanging on the cross, he says this, my God, why have you forsaken me? Why are you so far from saving me, so far from my cries of anguish?" Doesn't say all of it on the cross, but this is what he's referencing. "My God, I cry out by day, but you do not answer by night, and I find no rest." Jesus feels alone, cut off, isolated, bodily hopeless in some ways. He's on the cross. He is the one who has all the pain and all the selfishness and all the genocides and all the brokenness and all the murders, and all of that is put on Christ on the cross. Every dark thing that ever happened is put on Christ on the cross. And he is right then in that moment experiencing the weight of that. And he feels alone. He feels alone because his friends have run away. He feels alone because he is alone. But then something breaks. In his death on the cross, this example of the most unjust thing in some ways that happened, the killing of the innocent God for human beings, by human beings, this thing becomes, this huge outrage becomes the solution. It becomes the answer. Because in that moment, the cloth in the temple is torn in two. That cloth signified God being over here and people being over here, mediated by priests. And suddenly God becomes present and personal. His spirit comes. He's able to be with people. He's able to restore relationships with people, because Jesus deals with the problem of brokenness, selfishness, and he absorbs that into himself. He can transform people, and he can meet us in our experience of pain. So I don't have a full explanation for you today on suffering and on pain. I don't have all the answers. There are many questions I don't know. That's part of why I'm doing a doctorate, looking into it, and I still don't think I'll have all the answers. But I do have a solution, and his name's Jesus. He is the answer. He is the one that convinced me that there is an answer to the problem of suffering. He knows what it is to feel alone. He confronts shame. He acted. It's showing that God isn't standing back going, "I don't care, let them suffer." It's showing that in the worst moment in history, Jesus throws himself into the middle of it, into the worst point. I wonder what you make of that. I wonder how you feel about that. I wonder whether you feel that in some way that relates the cross to you. Because when somebody can share your experience and they can say, this is how I've felt too, things move to a deeper level of relationship and friendship. When a friend says to you, I've had that same experience, you go to a deeper level, don't you? And in the same way in suffering, when you allow Jesus to say, I know how you feel, I get it, and I'm so sorry, and I'm with you, that breaks your aloneness. That breaks the isolation. That is God with you in the pain that we're going through. And then Jesus' final answer to it is not just his death, but his resurrection. And this speaks to our cynicism, our hopelessness, our sense that things will never change, our anxieties. He actually rises from the dead, showing that God is God and that he is validated and authorized by God to make this payment for our sin. Not just the sin of the world, but my sin, my brokenness, my selfishness. So God both judges sin, my flawedness. Sin just means sort of distance from God, not meeting God's holy character. And in the cross, Jesus is dealing with that. That's what the cross is. I don't know if you've been hearing about the cross or learning about the cross, but if you miss this, that on the cross, Jesus shows us that he's with us and shows us that we can be restored in relationship with God if we come back to God, then actually that is the center. And so let me just tell you 5 things that this changes in your experience of suffering. 5 practical things now to take away with you that what you've just heard today will change. God's personal. He desires relationship. He chose for you to exist. He loves you so much that he joined you in suffering and dealt with your shame and your guilt and your pain on the cross. And fifthly, he promises one day he will finally defeat all shame and suffering in the new creation that he's bringing. May I recommend a couple of books if you want to look into this a little bit more. There's a book by Sharon Diricks called Why, and it looks at the stories of different people who have gone through suffering and how they have held on to hope through their experiences. So sometimes stories just really help us when we go through suffering. And then Philip Yancey's book, Where is God When It Hurts? I found that really, really helpful as well. Okay. I think I'm going to hand back to Dave and Karen, right? And we're going to do Q&A in a moment, but we're going to give people a chance to escape back to lectures. May God bless you. May the suffering that you go through be light. May you find hope. And may God speak to you and give you ways of wrestling with it and dealing with it. And may you never be alone in it. May you always know that he's with you.
Amazing. Yeah, thank you so much for that, Tom. Yeah, I think there's honestly so much to think about from that. So thank you so much for coming over and sharing quite a difficult topic with us. So we're going to have a time of Q&A now. Can I just check, do we have a Slido working? I think we do. Amazing. So hopefully this should come up working for us. We're just going to have a little bit of a time. Please do scan that QR code that we have there. And if you've got any questions to ask, we're just going to give a little bit of time for you to ask those, and Tom will answer those. If there's anything that's come to your mind, your heart, after hearing what we've spoken about there, I really encourage you with that. So definitely do that. We're going to be around afterwards as well, so please do grab either me or Karen, and especially do grab Tom if you've got any questions afterwards, if they don't get asked in the Slido. And also we've got some amazing talks coming up later today as well, which we'll run through in a bit. Do have a moment just to ask some questions on the Slido, and we'll be back shortly.
While you're just typing out your questions, I just wanted to highlight a few books as well. Tom mentioned a few, but we've got a brilliant bookstore just right there. Every single book on there is completely free, so please just help yourself. I wanted to highlight a couple that I thought could be quite helpful, especially given the topic on suffering. First of all, this one, Making Sense of Life. I've read this. This is great. We only have a few copies left, so if you're interested in that, check that out before it runs out. We've also got the New Testament Psalms and Proverbs. This particular edition, I think we've got it in blue and green, depending on what colour you like. At the front, there's a contents page. with different emotions that you might be feeling, for example, like loneliness or hurt or even love and friendship. And there'll be a reference page to where you can find passages that could give you a bit of guidance on what the Bible has to say about on those topics. So I really recommend picking those up. Chat to Nathan and Anna or whoever's at the bookstall at the time, and I'm sure they would love to help you find something that you might enjoy. But yes, keep those questions coming in, and we'll be back in a second.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing some of your questions, guys. I think that there's some really good things for us to think about together here. So let's do the top one. Christianity has done vastly less than science to genuinely alleviate suffering. Is this a problem for faith? I suppose that this depends a little bit how we define suffering, although I do concede that medical science has done a huge amount to heal and reduce pain. I think I'd say that medical science, in the Christian view, is a gift of God. It's a tool, it's a thing that God uses, because God wants to work relationally from people to people, that he equips human beings with tools to address suffering. And that we shouldn't see science or medicine as contrary to God, but actually it could be seen as an extension of God's compassionate care through the scientific gift. The other thing I'd say is just let's think about how we're defining suffering, because sufferings that I've been through in my life, and I've been through some stuff I wouldn't want to describe here because it would be upsetting and triggering. I've been through some stuff, as likely some of you have as well. It's actually not medical answers I need for that. It's how to heal and deal with shame and memory, how to process trauma, how to process and understand and trust people again after they do things that hurt you. So I think that if we just simply define suffering in terms of physical pain, and actually there can be a connection between the body and what we go through, our emotional, psychological experiences. The Body Keeps the Score, I think, is a book about this. I think if we're just a little careful with how we define suffering and we don't sort of push out of the picture types of psychological, emotional, personal suffering, then I think actually healthy Christian belief, healthy religious, spiritual practice, where you can have the hope of justice, where you can find gentle healing and companionship and friendship. This actually is the balm that I turn to. In my late teens, I was turning to lots of marijuana as a way of getting me through and dealing with pain. And what I was essentially doing was I was numbing emotional, psychological pain with the amount of skunk that I was smoking. And I found that you have to keep smoking more and more and more. And I think it's the same with most painkillers, is that you develop a tolerance to them. And ultimately, the Christian answer to suffering is that there will be an end to suffering. Science doesn't offer an end to suffering. Even if we can create robots, scan ourselves, put us into robot bodies like transhumanists promise, and we can somehow survive in different parts of the universe, the energy in the universe is going to be so spread out, and heat death is going to be so profound that there isn't going to be a survival. It'll just continue to be as it is. We need a new heavens and a new earth. We need a new situation in order to actually have hope in the future. I've got an astrophysicist nodding. So actually, Christianity does offer an ultimate finality to the problem of suffering as well. Those remarks would be where I begin to go. For the next question, which I think was to do with animal suffering, I would point to the creation story and how animals have a really important place in it, and how there's a goodness in creation, but however, the scope of sin that human beings commit impacts the creation and impacts animals. And that God shows that he cares about animals through the way that he redeems people. And ultimately, I think the hope of restoration in the future is a hope of a restoration of animals as well. I don't think we're going to be riding around naked in heaven on dinosaurs, but I do think that there's going to be a full creation that, in the same way as we've seen a creation this side of heaven, I think that there's going to be in the new heavens and the new earth. I think there's going to be embodiment, but it's going to be a sort of different dimension of embodiment, a bit like Jesus, how he could walk through walls, because he was, I think, more solid than a wall, if you can get your head around that. And I think that animals are going to be caught up in both the humans' fallenness and brokenness entering into the world, and also into the redemptive answer, into the reconstitution and rebuilding and renewal of the world. I think that animal suffering is relevant when we're thinking about that whole probability calculation back in the problem of evil. And we might have to think about, and I don't think there's been enough thought that's been done on animal suffering. And I concede that as a Christian philosopher, that there needs to be more work done on thinking through how animal suffering counts into theodicies. But I haven't done massive amounts of research on that personally, so I'm not going to waffle around much longer on it. The next question, I think, was, how can I relate? Maybe I'll make this the last question, not because I'm scared of the others, but because I'm on a time limit. What if I feel I can't relate to Jesus because he's from such a long time ago, from so long time ago? We all find it hard to relate to things for different reasons. And it might be that some of why we can't relate to something like Jesus or like God or anything might be because we need to grow in self-awareness of what would make us feel connected if it were connecting with us. So there can be, on our side of things, a need to be a bit more vulnerable and to ask our questions and to let our hearts open a bit, let our minds open a bit, and just sort of say, look, here's the stuff that I need answers to. And that's on our side of it. So that can be a part of it. You know, like a relationship where somebody says, oh, I'm not really relating to this person. One of the things you might ask as a good friend is you might say, are you shut down? Like, are you protecting yourself? Are you sort of, shielding yourself in some way? Is it safe for you to be a bit more vulnerable? And maybe there could be more of a connection from that. And it may be that we are afraid of a good, holy God because we're afraid of judgment, or we're afraid of all sorts of reactions from God. The thing about Jesus is he declares to us that God is loving towards us. He declares that God is graceful towards us. It means that when you close your eyes, or when you open your eyes and pray, when you say, God, I think you're there, and I wish I could reach out to you. I don't really know you, but I want to know you. When you do that, you know that God is loving towards you. There's a passage in the New Testament that talks about God's grace, God's love poured out and lavished towards you. So God's not like a speed camera going, you've done it wrong. Like he is a loving father running out to welcome you back. He loves you and he wants to know you. So don't be afraid of God. Maybe be afraid of some people because some people are awful. But don't be afraid of God because he is good and he's declared his goodness. So that's on our side of it, like what we could do to open up. And then the other side of it would be to just understand more clearly like what God is like, how God might want to relate. But in particular, I mean this. It might be that you're really passionate about medicine Or it might be that you're really passionate about science. And it may be that that's the point where you just think you feel alive. Or it may be that you're like really into extreme sports or kayaking or something. I don't know. I'm a motorcyclist myself. And that's the thing that I really love. I just love being on my motorbike. I love sort of going through the fields. I just love it. I feel kind of alive doing that. And I'm like, why do I feel so alive motorbiking? When actually, if I'm completely honest with you, I don't feel that alive when I'm singing songs in church. Why is it for me on my motorbike that I feel connected and sort of almost worshipful and alive to things? And then I realized that actually I'm doing worship on my motorbike. I'm looking at the creation and I'm looking back up the sunbeam to the one who sends it. And I'm saying, thank you, this is good, I receive it. And I'm spending time with God as I'm riding. And that's awesome. So there's also the discovery of a more fully orbed, a richer, deeper theology of the world and of work and of the things we love that can also include and help us to connect to Jesus and to connect to faith. So there's where we are, our vulnerability. There's a more sort of fully orbed view of God. But then the other part of it is also to realize that you are right now probably, I've got good stats to back this up because I'm a film guy as well, but you're probably watching a number of series at the moment. Netflix, Amazon Prime, you're watching a load of stories. You probably have favorite songs, favorite stories, favorite books, favorite YouTubers maybe. You've got favorite stories that move you. And there are things in those stories, for me it's father and son moments, right? I just love father and son moments, like the end of Blood Diamond, or the end of a film where the son comes back to the father and goes, I'm so sorry I messed up. I'm just like, whoa, I'm in pieces when I see stuff like that. I love it when watching people fall in love in films. I love watching people navigating hurt and finding new hope. These things make me sort of almost like, my wife's like looking over at me when we're sitting on the sofa watching these things, and she's like, are you crying? I'm like, no, just chopping onions, there are things that move you, right? There are stories that move you. There are things that people do that move you. There are things that you are already moved by. This was C.S. Lewis's question to Tolkien. He said, Tolkien, how can you relate to this guy, Jesus, from 2,000 years ago? I don't feel I relate to him. And Tolkien said, the stories, Jack, the stories that you read, those stories that move you, they are echoes of the gospel, of the truth of God in Christ. They are echoes of God's bravery, of God's courage, of God's rescue, of God's sacrifice, of God's redemption, of God's friendship. They are just echoes. You're already being moved. So, friend, whoever asked that question, and whoever else relate to that question, you're already being moved. Open your heart more and ask him to reveal himself to you. And one of the ways we can do that is by building up more of a picture of Jesus, by reading a gospel. And that's one of the gifts we want to give you for coming along today. There's a copy of the New Testament here. How many have we got? 100. I would love to offer every single person here, if they'd like one, a gospel or a copy of the New Testament like this. You can read and you can build up this picture of what Jesus is like. And you'll find that he may walk out of those stories into your imagination and into your heart. May God bless you. Please take that free gift. Take us up on that. And please come along to Things This Week.
Yes, thank you so much, Tom. And thank you, everyone, for holding with as we have run over slightly. There sadly isn't time to finish all of the questions in the Q&A here at the front, but please do not leave without chatting to someone, either the person sitting next to you or near you or us. Tom's here for a while, so he would love to chat and answer your questions. So please do not leave without getting those answered. But I believe it's lunchtime.
Yeah, exactly. So we have a free lunch just happening outside in the marquee. There's going to be some lovely stewards in high-vis jackets to guide you round to that. And we just really encourage you guys, go have some lovely free lunch and continue these conversations. If you've got questions that you asked that you weren't actually able to get an answer to in the end, please just speak to the person around you about those. And that'll be, there's just something so amazing in getting to go through those together. And like we say, ourselves and Tom will be heading over there as well. So do grab us and have a chat.
Yeah, we've also got a lot more stuff going on today as well. There should be some tote bag painting just beginning in the marquee. So check that out. And then at 5, we've got another talk in here about hope when we're feeling overwhelmed, something definitely as students we feel a lot of. And then finally, 6:30, where is Jesus in a world falling apart? and that will be followed by dinner as well.
That would be really good. And we'd just love to, once again, second that call. All those books over there are absolutely free, so please do go over, grab one that looks interesting, have a read. The guys over there know loads about them, so they can point you in the right direction for those. And I know we had 100 of those books, but some books are running a little bit low, so you might want to get in as soon as possible with that. But yeah, that brings us to the end. So thank you so much for coming along, and we'll see you guys here again at 5 o'clock.